Good evening, everybody. We are going to get started. It may be that some other folks trickle in here. Thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Abby Abel. I'm with the East Colfax Avenue BRT project team. I will be facilitating this evening, along with my colleague, Emma Harrison, who will be facilitating for the folks who are joining us online. Thanks to all of you who are. Hopefully you've all had a chance to take the survey, as we just talked about, and review some of the materials that we made available to you both this evening and prior to this evening. We're going to be talking a lot about. So before we get started, let me recognize a couple of the folks that are in the room that are leading the project and a couple of our partners as well. David Prensinger in the back of the room here is the City and County's Transit Director. Thank you for coming. We have John Stewart, who's the project director for this project. Brian, where are you? Brian is our program manager for the project. So a lot of the questions will be directed to them. And then I also want to acknowledge all of our partners in this project. Without this collaboration, the project wouldn't be possible. And so that includes the City of Aurora, RTD, CDOT, FDA, and all of our friends and colleagues at the business improvement districts, as well as our city council reps, those who are current and those who are incoming, which we're excited about, and also our equity and accessibility. So I'm going to jump into the agenda, but let me just say a couple of things. We were with many of you in April, so not too long ago, and we heard a couple of things as part of that meeting. We heard one, we'd like to spend some time before the meeting with materials. We also heard that we'd like to see the transportation report, and we'd like to see what was in the transportation report. Then we also heard from you that you'd like to spend less time presenting, and more time having a discussion. Give you the opportunity to ask questions. That is exactly what we're going to try to do this evening, and hopefully you'll see that reflected in the agenda. So here's what we plan to do in the next hour and a half to 2 hours. I am going to do a quick recap. I think it's really important to share with you. Here's what we heard from you as part of the last engagement, and here's some of the feedback. And so we're going to share some of that with you so that we can sort of close that loop and move on. John Stewart, our project director, will sort of step back for a moment and talk a little bit about the broader vision, the benefits, the goals of the project, and how it's going to work, right? We get a lot of questions about what is this even going to look like and how's it going to operate? And so we'll spend some time doing that. I know many of you in the room are new faces to the project. Many of you have been involved for a decade. And so we want to make sure that we're recalibrating and we're all operating from the same set of information. And then we'll move into a panel discussion. And so what we wanted to do this evening, we'll talk about it momentarily, is really talk about movement through the corridor with BRT. So what is movement going to look like? What can we expect as transit riders? What can we expect as those who drive through the corridor in our vehicles? What can we expect as those who typically ride our bike or walk or scoot or use a wheelchair? What can we expect when the BRT is in service? And so we know that you all have different preferences in terms of how you travel. And so we want to be able to address some of your questions based on your preferences for how you travel. And then we'll just move into open discussion. So hopefully many of you have lots of good questions to engage the panel, and we'll engage in a dialogue. And then a couple of us will sort of hang around. If you have some additional questions, we're happy to stick around and answer those questions if you prefer to have those conversations one-on-one. This I've already talked about, just again, giving you a sense of what the sort of the breadth of the conversation we hope to have this evening is going to be. Our modes differ, our preferences differ. What can we expect with the BRT? And I'll tell you, we had this workshop about a week ago with the area from Broadway to Colorado. And we're really interested in hearing perspectives from this community, the Colorado to Yosemite community. And so that's exactly why we're here this evening, why we're so thankful that so many showed up. Let me just hit the sort of the housekeeping for a moment, because there's some of you in the room and there's some of you that are joining virtually. You're going to have plenty of opportunity for Q&A. We'll talk about this when we get there. When we get to Q&A, we ask that you raise your hand. And we ask that you ask one question and spend no more than a minute asking that question so that we can give plenty of time to those that have many of their questions. And then the same is essentially true for those who are joining us virtually. You'll be able to submit your questions via chat, and then Emma will be viewing those over the course of the next, whatever it is, 15, 20 minutes, and then we'll flag those questions when we get to open discussion. And finally, we ask that this be a constructive, positive conversation, and that we show respect for both the project team and for each other as peers. Let me just quickly hit on our spring engagement. So April 2023, again, you're here, some of you were in the room. This was over at the Carl Madison Rec Center. We've had plenty of engagements thus far. We had a survey. We're going to talk about that in a moment. Over close to 200 people, 200 of you engaged in the previous community open houses. We had a survey, as I just mentioned, 400 plus of you responded to that survey, and we got over 700 comments. Here's the synthesis of that, but I will tell you that the summary with all the details exists on the project website. And so if you want to look at that in detail, it is available to you, and we can provide that linked to those of you virtually in our chat. Quick summary of what we heard from you. You want to prioritize safety, comfort, and accessibility at BRT stations. Those are some of your top priorities for the stations themselves. You care a lot about the pedestrian and the cyclist experience. This goes sort of to the broader philosophy of DOTI. While this is a bus project, it's not just about investing in buses. It's about investing in multimodal opportunities, and we'll talk about that. You all want to ensure that the public art on the project reflects the character and the history of the local community. So these are the words that we heard from you in the survey. And you also prefer digital communication channels, our project website, the emails that we share with you. If you're not signed up for those emails, we will add all of the signatures and the emails for this evening to that listserv so that you can continue to receive those emails. But you'd like to see perhaps some more earned media spots, right? Work with the media and also to see us more engaged in community events or neighborhood meetings. We'll talk about what our plans are there. And then finally, you want us again to talk about the substantive issues, the project benefits, traffic safety impacts, and small business support. We hope we get to a lot of that this evening and talk to you about where we're going with the project and those topics. And finally, can you get the project done? We hear that a lot from many of you. And so that came through loud and clear in the survey. And we'll talk about the timeline here. And then quickly on public art. So Arts and Venues is our partner in this project. You all are aware, I believe, that 1% of the construction dollar amount will go to public art. That's a huge opportunity. Last time we engaged, we talked about opportunities for the community to apply to be part of that art selection committee. Lots of folks applied. Looks like 30 applications, and so the team is in the process of constructing that art selection committee. So it's moving forward, which is exciting. And this you can see is sort of the general timeline. So an orientation in the fall of this year, and the selection process is about 6 months. So more to come on that, but the ball is definitely moving forward there. So with that brief recap, what I'd like to do is turn it over to John Stewart, our project director. Again, step back and talk about the vision, the purpose of the project. What is it going to look like when it's in service?
And yeah, let's talk about the vision, the benefits, and how we BRT. First of all, what has the city been trying to do? We've been working on these planning efforts for years in the form of Blueprint Denver and Moves Everyone. And it's been the city's effort to try and hear what the people of the city want to do as far as what is the city going to look like in the future? What is it going to look like? How are we going to move between places? What is our city? What is the vision for our city? 24 and beyond. And these are the goals that kind of came up through that planning effort. So we have mobility. People want more choices on how to move through the city. We've heard that over and over, and also concerns about traffic and on and on. And also we heard about safety. Safety is a big concern amongst people. There's been a lot of lot increasing accidents between cars and people using other modes of transportation as well. So safety is coming. Sustainability, what are we doing to curb climate change in the future? That's come up as another priority. And also community, building a place that makes it a good feeling place for people to want to be. How do we more connect our city together? And also quality, that's more to do with the transportation, the state of good repair for the elements of transportation that we do build. And also looking through all of this with a lens of equity. And that's just trying to give everybody an equal opportunity to meet these goals. So what makes Colfax a good candidate for building a bus rapid transit system? So there's a lot of reasons why it's a good idea. First of all, it has a history of transit through the corridor. In the turn of the century, up until I think the 1950s or maybe 60s, there was a streetcar that ran up and down Colfax, and it was very popular at that time. Also, it has the highest ridership of any RTD bus line in the area. So a lot of people use this as a way to move east and west. Another thing to keep in mind is that Colfax has, in effect, had what it's been doing is kind of dividing North and South Denver because so many cars move through it. So it was seen as an opportunity to try and use it as a way to connect people rather than divide people. There goes my slides. Oh, okay. Perfect. So if we build the bus rapid transit project on East Colfax, these are the kind of benefits that we're going to see. So there's social, economic, and environmental benefits that stand to gain by building this project. First of all, it meets our mobility goals of providing more transit options. So more ways to meet the city. It also improves safety, comfort, and convenience. And so it's better transit service. It's also safer transit service. Apologies for slide with here. And it also helps to build community. It makes for, by putting the bus rapid transit in the middle of the roadway, it allows us to make a bigger effort to activate the streetscape on either side. And so that helps to build community. There's also a lot of economic benefits by reducing travel time for the bus and also providing more equitable access to transportation options throughout the city. And then there's the environmental benefits. If more people are using bus to travel and other modes of transportation, it uses less greenhouse gases than if we're all in our own car. Also in the fall of 2021, we did a community survey. This is a public survey that we did to see what it was that the community most wanted to see from a bus rapid transit project. So the two highest priorities were better service and improved safety. And so we thought about that through the lens of our mobility plan. The first slide that I showed you are 5 goals, and thinking about how are we going to have better transit service? How are we going to improve safety? How are we going to give people more mobility options? And Colfax BRT just hits all of those. It allows people, it moves more people through the corridor faster and safer, and it provides better transit service. So here's a brief recap of the scope of the project. It starts in Denver Union Station and then moves east all the way out to I-225 in Aurora. The yellow segment is downtown, and in that segment, the bus lanes would be on the side of the road, so it would be a side running bus rapid transit project there. And then in the blue area, that's the center running bus transit. Dang it, I'm having trouble. Okay, the blue area is the center running bus transit project. So this is mostly what we've been talking about with the center running lanes, with bus stations in the middle of the roadway. And then once we get to the orange area on the right, that's the city of Aurora, it moves back to a side. It's in mixed traffic there, so there's not a dedicated bus lane at this time. So it kind of transitions. There's three different things, right? There's the side lane downtown, center running through the blue area, and the side lane. So the timeline, the project timeline, what have we been up to? So we've been spending a couple of years working on preliminary design, identifying our funding sources, working through our FTA application process. So last August, almost a year ago, we submitted our small starts rating application. And then this past March, we received notification that the project was rated high by FTA. So we got our FTA rating. We got a line item in the president's budget as well for $126.9 million. So that was all really exciting news, because really what that means is FTA agrees with us that this is a really good candidate to use bus rapid. In fact, with the high rating, there's more than 40 projects in the small startup program. Only 3 of those got a high rating. This is one of those 3. So FTA agrees with us that this is a good case. So now we're in the final design process. We're working on getting a construction manager, general contractor on board. And we'll be working through kind of putting all our plans together. And then in August, we're going to be submitting all these plans and reports to FTA to demonstrate that the project is ready for construction. Now, this is a long process. That's just the first step. But we'll be looking at going to construction sometime in the summer of 2024. And then about 2.5 years of construction. And then after that, we'll be going to January 2027, when we expect this bus line, bus rapid transit project to be in and running. So with that said, I'm going to give it back to Abby. She's going to talk about.
John, thank you. Actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite our panelists to come up and take a seat, because we're going to move into the sort of the panel piece of this of the evening, and then open it up to Q&A. And so as they're all joining us, and I will introduce them momentarily, let me just remind everybody, the reason that we're here is to talk broadly about the corridor. What can we expect based on the preferences that you have, whether you use the bus, whether you drive a car or bike or scoot or use a wheelchair or walk. Let's talk about all of that. The panel is prepared to do that, again, really based on the grounded in a lot of materials that you've all exposed to over the last months. And we can also answer questions related to anything that John has talked about. So happy to do that as well. The way that we're going to do this is we are going to share some of your results, the poll, and that will help where we want to go with the conversation. You all comfortable on that? It's cozy. Let me do this quickly. Let me introduce the panel, and then we'll go to the poll results, and then we'll start with a little bit of facilitated Q&A, and then we'll move to all of your questions. All right. So you all know John Stewart here to my left, the Dottie Project Director. Stephen Smith, Doug Monroe, RTD. Doug is the Manager of Corridor Planning. And then we have Charlie Alexander, who's part of the consulting team, who's really lead on the transportation report and can answer a lot of the questions relevant to the transportation report that many of you may have this evening. And next to him is Nick Vanderkwak, who is also part of the consulting team on the project and is really taking the lead on the parking component, the curbside access plan, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. All of that cool material over there on the side of the room has to do with the curbside access plan, which Nick can reference in a little bit. Stephen Reho from the Department of Transportation and Infrastructure. Stephen is Principal City Planner. And I'll tell you that Stephen has really been leading on the multimodal integration with the project. So when we think about bikes, we think about pedestrian access and safety. It's really Stephen that will want to direct some of those questions to. And then last but not least, Kurt Upton. So Kurt joins us from Community Planning and Development. Kurt is a Principal City Planner And I'll tell you that Kurt has been involved in this project for nearly a decade, really leading some of the work around the neighborhood planning initiatives and the alignment between the neighborhood planning initiatives and bus rapid transit. So when it comes to historical context and it comes to the prioritization of the priorities that emerge from those plans and how those connect to the BRT, Kurt is the person that can answer a lot of those questions. So these folks will be joining us in a facilitated conversation in a moment and can answer some of the questions that you all so let's do this. Let's take a look at the results of the poll. And I'm going to ask Emma to take the lead in sharing that with us. I'm going to hand over the mic to Emma.
So let's get to know your neighbors today. So thanks for the 20 of you who submitted survey results as you walked in. Really the purpose of this is to get to know you a little bit more, how you use the corridor, and learn your priorities based on which mode you prefer. So, not surprisingly, the majority of you live here from Colorado to Yosemite. We love to see that, about 65% of you. A lot of you also frequent this area and or work here. The majority of you have reviewed the transportation report, which is also great, done your homework. 65%, 13 of you have. And the vast majority, 20 of you who submitted the survey, use car to travel through this part of the corridor. So that's about 85%. So just 3 of you do not prefer car travel. So getting into the priorities, let me zoom out a little bit so we can see the full breadth. So this question is our bus riders. So only 2 people answered this question. Of those 2, their priorities are benefits to bus riders and rider safety and comfort, followed by center running alignment and bike access and safety. So again, those are our 2 bus riders. So here are our car travelers. Big swath of priorities amongst our car travelers. So the ones that rise to the top are benefits to bus riders, bike access and safety, followed by traffic diversion. And let's see, center running, left turns, really a good mix amongst our car drivers. And thank you guys for submitting additional questions here too. We will get to them, or you can ask them in person. Let's see, no biker scooter preferences. And lastly, the sole person who prefers to walk, their priorities are rider safety and comfort, benefits to bus riders, and enhanced walking experiences. So thank you again for submitting that input, and I'll turn it back over to Abby to facilitate the Q&A.
Okay, great. Give us just a moment to figure out the mics, and then we'll get going here. Worked. Okay, business. Thanks all for your patience as we just figure out the technique. Really appreciate the feedback from everybody. So interesting. First of all, many of you obviously live here. Many of you prefer to drive, and yet what was really interesting is just seeing that the number, sort of the key issue that you're interested in is the bus. What's it going to look like to ride the bus? What are some of the key benefits to riding the bus? So I'd love to be able to start there, and then we can go through a couple of the priorities that we saw very clearly some of the other folks who ride the bus, or the two people who prefer to, I think, to ride their bike or to scoot. So let's start with, Charlie, I'm going to ask you the question. What are some of the benefits that bus riders can expect once the BRT is in service?
Great questions. Sort of like getting right distance here. So I think not a big surprise here to anyone in the room that travel in East Denver is going to increase into the future. And obviously a lot of people moving east-west through this area and through this part of the corridor today. So what we've anticipated and was seen in the transportation report is that the effect of that increased demand for travel into the future has a pretty detrimental impact on travel time for buses if we do nothing. What we found in the transportation analysis and report is that with no improvements made, bus travel times could increase by as much as 30 minutes between downtown and I-225, which is a really significant increase in travel time for people riding the bus, and really a decrease in the utility of that for people traveling by bus. So the implementation of BRT in this quarter is expected to save around 30 minutes of travel time in the rush hour in the peak direction for people traveling on the bus between I-225 and downtown Denver. Now, not everyone travels that full distance of the corridor, but proportionally, the more of the corridor you travel, the more travel time you will save by bus. Some of the other benefits for people riding the bus in particular are increased reliability. So by buses having their own lane, that guaranteed travel time is going to happen at all times of day, 24/7 in terms of that very reliable and quick travel time. And then the delivery of service is actually going to be simplified from today. So currently, there's a frequency of transit on Colfax between the 15 and the 15L, but they operate at different frequencies, and it's a little bit complex for passengers to know, do I go to this stop or do I go to this stop into the 15L? Which bus will come next? There's a little bit of a calculus that riders have to make. With the implementation of bus rapid transit, that will be very simplified. We'll be having buses coming every 4.3 minutes to every single one of the stations. So that rider experience and that simplification, we expect to be a big benefit for people using the bus on the corridor.
Charlie, thank you. And I think it's important to talk just for a moment about who rides the bus and who we can expect to ride the bus. And so I'm wondering if either John or somebody else can talk a little bit about the composition of the corridor and who typically really utilizes the bus today and we expect to in the future.
I can do it. Okay, so yeah, the composition, really it's a lot of people that are making other connections. So there's obviously a lot of other bus lines that connect to the Colfax BRT via north-south routes. And so a lot of people are making more than one trip having to make connections. So one of the benefits that people doing that kind of trip would see is a kind of a shorter travel time for the entire bus. It has kind of a multiplier effect by reaching out to everyone. Also, there's a lot of people that do not own a car that use the existing bus. And so at having this bus rapid transit project implemented, it kind of gives a little more, it gives a little more help, a little more transportation reliability to people who have it. So that's another benefit.
Charlie, if you don't mind sharing the stat that we typically talk about with regard to just to sort of explore that point.
Yeah, that's a great stat. So, and this is on John's slide in the introduction. So nationally, when COVID hit in 2020, obviously people's travel patterns were impacted. And if you looked across the country, transit ridership after the pandemic had hit was down to 20% of what it was before, right? The routes 15 and 15L maintained ridership of 60% of their pre-ridership levels, which I think says a lot about sort of this as a lifeline transportation route for people in the city. A lot of our service workers, a lot of our essential workers that are using the 15 and 15Ls a day. So that ridership is rebounding, it's growing. The pre-pandemic ridership was around 25,000 rides per day. We expect that by 2040, with the improvements and with the increase in demand for travel in the area, that'll go up to the low 30s, around 32,000 rides per day. And just to put a number on a point that John mentioned, 40% of the people that use the 15 and 15L make a transfer at some point in their stop, usually to one of the intersecting north-south routes, like the 40 on Colorado Boulevard, for example. So when we think about Colfax BRT, we often simplify it to sort of the east-west travel equation, but in reality, Colfax sort of serves as the spine for transit in all of East Denver, and that's what makes this project even more important.
Appreciate that, sure, thank you. So the other priority that I saw come up here in in the poll results was around bike and pedestrian safety. And so I'd love for Stephen, for you to be able to just talk about what are we doing bike and ped safety as part of this project, and what can the community expect?
Yeah, so great question. One of the things that I'm really excited about supporting this project is how it is, yes, a transit project as we discussed, but it really is a safety project for one of Denver's most dangerous streets. Anybody who's been out there knows it's pretty inhospitable however you get around. And so both making the transit improvements while improving a lot of the safety is a key piece of that. For a lot of the cross section these days, you're crossing anywhere between 6 or 7 lanes. You include the 2 parking lanes, the 4 travel lanes, the turn lane. And so with this redesign, we'll be greatly shortening a lot of those crossings for people walking to and from their businesses, to and from their homes, to and from the transit, in addition to crossing on bikes. So a lot of those types of benefits, slowing some of the speed of cars that we frequently see, outside of the speed going times the speed limit will be another really big benefit. In addition to things like expanding sidewalks, that shade, make it more comfortable, all the way to improving those north-south crossings back. So definitely can get into more detail, but I think while this is a transit project, it's also a massive safety project that will make it better for everybody, whether you're driving, walking, taking the bus, not having to risk your life getting out on the street.
I so appreciate hearing the safety component. Stephen, you underscored the safety component, and I think we all think about safety in terms of the physical infrastructure. I think probably heard from many community members, what is safety, what is the experience going to look like on the bus itself? So Doug, I'd love for you to be able to address sort of what is RTD doing to ensure that the experience is safe and comfortable for riders?
So the stations will be designed somewhat similar to how a light rail station is today. Not on the same scale, but they'll have the security cameras that light rail stations have. They'll have emergency call boxes for anything that might happen when you're at the stations. The buses themselves, the plan is to have them operate more similarly to how light rail does as well, where you'll pay for your fare on board and you'll be able to board through anywhere. The driver will still be on the bus, so if there's if there's any incidents or anything like that, there'll be a presence there at least, and then fare enforcement, there'll be random fare checks as we do on light rail as well. So that'll be from both uniformed police officers and from contracted security officers that handle those fare checks. I think one thing that enabling that off-board fare collection allows for having fewer interactions between passengers and the operator of the bus. Fares are probably things that we see, and somewhat contributes to when you feel somewhat unsafe on the bus, and having this having the fare collection handled on board and the enforcement handled by security situation of buses there as well. So
Appreciate that, Doug, and I think it just helps to round out the conversation around safety, and we're happy to answer any other questions or that. So let's go back to the polls and the results of the poll. So nearly everyone in this room lives in the corridor. Nearly everyone in this room prefers to drive. And so one of your top priorities for those who prefer to drive is what is this going to mean for traffic diversion off of Colfax? We're taking away 2 lanes. So what is it going to mean for traffic diversion for those who live in the neighborhood? So we'd love to be able to answer that question. It's top of mind for many of you in the room. And so I'd love to just engage Charlie in this, in the answer, really talk about what we've learned through the transportation report in terms of traffic diversion, and what that's gonna look like, and what folks in the room might be able to expect.
Yep, obviously, this is a question we're getting a lot through all of our meetings on the quarter, so. I think it's probably not a surprise to folks in the room that by repurposing one of the lanes in each direction on Colfax for bus travel, that we do see some level of, or anticipate some level of shift in traffic off of Colfax onto the parallel streets. In sort of the neighborhood we're in, east of Colorado Boulevard, you know, that's 13th and then 14th Avenues and 17th Avenue. The net result of that shift from a travel time standpoint is that if you're traveling off peak, so not, you know, not during rush hour, or if you're traveling during rush hour, but in the opposite direction of peak hour traffic. So if you're headed, say, eastbound in the morning, when most people are headed westbound into downtown, we're not expecting, and the transportation analysis found, we're not expecting to see much shift or travel time change for people traveling at those times or in those directions. But for people traveling in the peak hour, in the peak direction, the net result of that shift from a travel time standpoint works out to about an additional minute per mile that you travel through the area. So different people travel different lengths through the area. The average trip length to the area is about 3 miles. So for people traveling, again, peak hour, peak direction, that average distance about 3 additional minutes of travel time, but 1 minute per mile travel. In terms of the number of cars that are going to shift, it depends on where you are. It depends which street and whether or not you're closer to downtown or closer to the east part of the corridor here. But the magnitude of that shift during the peak hour and the peak direction works out to about 2 to 5 vehicles per minute. Again, 2 minutes, I'm sorry, 2 vehicles being on the lower side, five on the higher side. These streets are already carrying in the ballpark of 25 to 50 vehicles per minute now. So it's a little bit in the eye of the beholder in terms of whether or not 2 to 5 vehicles per minute constitutes, you know, a major effect for you. But that's why we wanted to also provide you with that travel time statistic that talks about, you know, how that change in volume results in changes in the amount of time that people will travel to the area.
Thank you. Appreciate that. And I'm sure there are more questions. I saw a lot of heads nodding, so I'm sure we're going to talk through that a little bit more. I do wanted to address the top priority, I believe, if I saw that correctly, for the one first to walk. Here's about the walking experience. John, I'm going to ask you what can be expected in terms of enhancements to the streetscape or to the walking experience for those who do prefer to walk.
Sure, yeah. So we do expect kind of a transformative experience with this project. We've been very mindful of trying to make the areas past the curve and next to the businesses more friendly for pedestrians. So the types of things that we're doing are we're adding trees wherever we can. Those trees will be irrigated, so we could die the first year they get planted. We're also adding curb bump outs wherever we can to add more space for people on their feet. And also to add bike connectivity and all that, but I guess the main intent that I want to reiterate is that we're being very mindful of what the pedestrian experience is, particularly with the area outside of the curve on the north and south sides of the streets, and being mindful to make sure that that is a place that is welcoming, that knits the community together and provides a way to connect the community instead of divide it.
Thank you. And then I'm going to ask 2 more questions because Kurt and Nick, I don't want you to feel left out here. And I think you can provide really, really important perspective to the project. So I would love for you just to talk a little bit about, Nick, the work that you're going to be leading around curbside access and why that matters to the plan here. And then I'll have another.
Sure, thank you. So I'm leading the portion of the project looking at the curbside access plan, which is, if you look off to the other side of the room here, we've got some exhibits that show the area that we're studying and looking at. The main focus of that particular portion of the project is looking at the area between Broadway and Colorado. And that's the maps you see up there are that area, mainly because most of the parking that's being lost that currently exists, that won't exist with the project, The majority of that is located on the western side of Colorado in that portion of the corridor. It's also the area of the corridor that has higher densities and more utilization of the parking on the streets that take place in those areas. However, the project is concerned as a whole, the whole corridor and parking, if you recognize that there may be some changes to the way people park, especially next to stations east of Colorado Boulevard as well. So we want to hear any questions or thoughts related to that. Also just wanted to mention after this Q&A session, we'll be hanging around by the boards and happy to chat one-on-one or with you about any specific questions. And we're looking for input and feedback in the area between Broadway and Colorado to look at specifically today, where are some parking generators, where's the highest level of activity happening from a parking and curb use perspective. You know, this meeting here is focused on the other side of Colorado, but many of you travel the whole length of Colfax and have things there. So look forward to talking to you on that later.
Right, last question, Kurt. I think, you know, as I mentioned, sort of context matters. And so perhaps many of you in the room were involved in the neighborhood planning initiative. And so I do think it's worth just spending 30 seconds talking about that process and how this project, the Colfax BRT, really aligns to some of the priorities that emerged through that process.
Sure. So the Eastern Plan, which is the neighborhood plan that covers this part of the Colfax corridor, was a multi-year process that concluded in 2020. That's a supplement to Denver's comprehensive plan, or Blueprint Denver, which shapes the entire vision for the city of where we want to go, how we want to strategically manage growth, what kind of transportation system we want in the future. And generally, the East Area Plan looks at a variety of topics, and key to that is the interrelationship of housing, transportation, affordable housing, economic development, parks, open space, green infrastructure. So it kind of has a comprehensive long-term view of how these neighborhoods are desired to take shape in the future. And from a transportation perspective, it was pretty loud and clear that what people wanted was a safe place to walk and bicycle, especially for children, seniors, other people at risk who may have disabilities, and to facilitate a greener, cleaner transportation system that has less pollution, less greenhouse gases. And so with that, a variety of transportation projects were recommended in the East Area Plan, mostly pedestrian bicycle infrastructure. The East Colfax BRT project was a top priority in that plan. And it's important to recognize that our area plans are a legislative process. So they're adopted by city council by ordinance, signed by the mayor. And that's important for a couple of reasons. One is it does guide our capital program, future bond elections, other infrastructure decisions that we make. All zoning decisions by law have to be consistent with adopted plans. And it also provides guidance for anti-displacement programs, affordable housing programs, economic development programs, et cetera. And so I'd be happy to talk further if anyone has any questions about how our planning processes work or how the Colfax BRT project integrates into that. Yeah.
It's great. I think as I mentioned, I think the context is really helpful. So hopefully we've done a couple of things here. Hopefully we've addressed some of the priorities that you all expressed in the poll. And by the way, those topics we didn't just generate. These are topics that we've heard from the community sort of most prevalently over the last 6 months to 2 years. These are sort of questions that keep coming to us. So we wanted to make sure that we have the conversation about them because we know that they're top of mind for you. So that's the first thing. And the second thing, what we hope we did with this is, one, give you a sense of who can speak to different aspects of the project. And that this really is a multifaceted, complex project with multiple perspectives. So with that, we'd love to hear from you. Colleen has the mic. And so what I'd ask you to do, and we'll start here with you in orange and then followed by, but what I'd like you to do, again, just reminding everybody of sort of the housekeeping rules. One, just to start, we ask that you keep this sort of respectful toward the panel, to your peers. Two, if you could ask your question in less than a minute, and to the extent that you can, if you can limit that to a question as opposed to a multi-part question, we always appreciate that. All right, so let's get it going.
Yep.
Thanks, Anderson. I think, I guess a question before that, just maybe, something I walked away with from this, conversation so far that maybe is obvious, but did not connect the dots until today is one of the benefits of this project is we no longer have a 15 and a 15L. So those two lines just merge into the new BRT. And I guess that's sort of a question, but I think I heard that definitively stated. So again, that's not my question. I'd also just say that, you know, I have, as a number of folks have pointed out, this has been like a very long journey through the East area plan process. Before that, I remember going to a workshop closer to Anschutz campus where I work in Aurora, providing feedback on this. Very excited to finally see this come to fruition. So thank you to all of you who've been a part of that process. The question is, and I'm not sure that any of the folks, except maybe John, can speak to this. I didn't hear it specifically called out by any folks. Is that I think did see it on one of the slides though. One of the things that I've heard, particularly in conversations with folks, business owners in the East Colfax area, is that it came up at the election conversation that for the district is how those businesses will manage to make it through 2 or 3 year process of this construction project with the impacts to parking and all the different impacts to access to those businesses. Again, I did see that highlighted on one of the slides. I'd love to hear more about what the plans are to support those small businesses through this process to make sure that we don't lose some of the things that really make these Colfax realistic.
Sure, yeah, happy to talk about that. So small businesses, what are we doing to mitigate any impacts that they might have? It's a subject that we've been thinking a lot about. And it's also part of some of the plans that we need to submit to the Federal Transit Administration. We need to demonstrate to them as part of our project readiness plan of what we're going to do to help mitigate any impacts that might happen. And so we're still putting that plan together, and I think that we're going to be able to talk about it in a lot more detail, probably about 6 months from now, I would say, because we're still kind of putting that plan together. But right now I can say that we are putting a plan together. There is the intent to talk about setting aside some sort of budget in case businesses need to be financially remunerated for any kind of impacts. That's still very much in the early stages, so it's not definite that that is happening, but if we're going to have a plan to deal with those impacts, that I can definitely assure you of. And so we're going to be working through the design process, and before we go to construction, we're going to have a plan in place, and we're going to communicate that to all of the business owners along the corridor and implement that plan when we go to construction.
But I just think one of the sorry. Well, one of the ideas I've heard some of the business owners in some of these conversations that is the sort of, and again, maybe it's very part of the process, but if you're going to have catering as part of the build out process, or things like that as part of these conversations, is there a way to make sure that the small businesses on the corridor are the first we go to when we're doing that sort of purchasing or hiring or?
Yes, I think it's a great point, and I will tell you that the team has done a pretty good job of activating small businesses thus far for events like this, and I do believe that is a priority. Let me just acknowledge a couple things. First of all, thank you for being a part of all of these community engagements for such a long time. Really appreciate that. You had a question about the consolidation of 1515L as well. So John, would you mind just taking 30 seconds to address that? Or
Yeah, so the plan is to just operate one service along Colfax. So the 15 and 15L will be merged into the new BRT. It's a little bit wider stop spacing than the current 15, a little bit closer stop spacing than the current 15L, but with the, you know, addition of the BRT and the bus lanes, and port fare collection and transit signal priority and all that stuff, it should be a faster trip than 15Ls today.
Great. Thanks. All right, good. And I think it's good to clarify. David, yes.
I did want to answer the construction question a little more directly. So when you hear 2.5 years, people think, okay, we're going to have construction zone for the whole corridor for 2.5 years. That's not the case at all. We've had our construction contractor proposals and interviews. None of them are proposing something like that. In fact, they're all very expressive of the concerns of the community. Some of them are here tonight, listening to your all's comments, and they're all trying to find the shortest possible position in front of the doors of businesses to get this done. So it'll probably be measured in months, not years.
Great. Okay, yes.
Okay, hi, I'm Tangier Barnes Wright, and I lived on Birch Street for Colfax and 14 for just over 2 years, and so I haven't had a whole lot of opportunity to be involved. I'm really excited about this project. I mostly drive on the, though I would prefer to take the bus, it's often late, and very crowded, so this will help with that, and that makes me happy. I ride my bike weekly on the 12, 16, 17. And you're gonna be us here just to learn and answer on Danish, like how it's going to happen and roll out and what it's going to look like. I wasn't prepared to have any questions about the like checks, but that piqued some interest. Can you, so there's gonna be police doing fare checks at the station for security guards. I don't know if it's still the case, but the ticket takers on the A line when it first rolled out had guns. And I would hope ticket fare checkers and security guards don't have. Because that's like not, that is. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, currently that is the case. On most of on all of light rail and on most of the commuter rail, they are security guards or uniformed police that are armed. We have switched to a new method of fare enforcement on our N line, where we have transit ambassadors on the trains that fulfill the role of the security guard who is required to be there as a second crew member, basically on the. But we do have that. The transit ambassadors that are enforcing fares and educating passengers on the N line. I don't know exactly, what direction that's headed as far as the full district, but it's certainly an option that may well make its way.
Cool. And I mean, I know it's not necessarily Dottie's job recontract the work out, but like spokespeople, and I would recommend the ambassador route, and I mean, having armed checking fares opens up opportunity for unnecessary conflict with community. Thank you for all of your work on this.
I appreciate that. And I just want to quickly address something. You said the existing line is crowded and often late. And so I do want to just, Doug, if you can just take a moment again about what are we doing to ensure reliability? How does center running really ensure reliability? And then the other thing is, what do the buses look like? And will they be able will they have more capacity than the current 15Ls?
Sure. So the Route 15 currently operates with standard transit buses. They're 40 feet long, and about 37 seats on them. The Route 15L operates with articulated buses, which are the bendy buses or the accordion buses. They have 55 seats on them. And the plan for the BRT is to go to an all articulated bus fleet. So they'll all have 55 seats. So or somewhere around that, because we're working on having interior bike racks on this as well. But so we'll have articulated buses with higher capacity operating the entire route. And so there should be additional capacity in that regard. Having the center running lanes, dedicated bus lanes, transit signal priority, off-board fare collection will all contribute to the reliability of it. Right now, things where people get get on and they don't have their fare ready, or they want to argue with the driver about the fare, and then the bus falls behind schedule, bus behind it catches up with it, buses get stuck in traffic, or one bus is trying to carry more passengers than the others, and it just falls farther and farther behind. All of that should improve with the BRT, just in the nature of the operations with the outdoor boarding and having the dedicated lanes up and down the corridor.
Yeah, appreciate the question, appreciate your engagement. I saw a question back here, way in the back, and then we'll come to you, sir, in the black shirt. Hi, I just want to say, first of all, thank you for doing this project. I'm really excited. I live in Aurora and I commute downtown twice a week. I try not to drive because most reasons, but I typically bike to the bus station and take the 15 and 15L. So I'm really excited to see this because my current commute time is an hour and I'm looking forward to that shortening. My question is, because of Aurora, I saw the section that is mixed traffic, and I recognize that there are some challenges that potentially you may not be able to answer because none of you work for Aurora, but I was wondering, if it's mixed traffic and there's no BRT lane, but there is more increased frequency because there's increased buses, what's the plan for mitigating bus bunching in Aurora so that it doesn't have the traffic down there? Thanks very much. Before we answer that question, so I appreciate you showing up. We are going to be having a Aurora specific workshop on July 12th. You're already here, so we appreciate that. Just want to let you know, and we will be able to answer those questions in depth. What does it look like in Aurora? What can you expect? So appreciate the question. Who would like to take that, John or Doug?
Yeah, so Aurora, what does the Aurora portion look like? I guess that's kind of how I heard the question, in preventing buses from bunching up. So one thing about, so it is in mixed flow traffic, so we do expect it to run maybe a little bit slower than it does in Denver, but there's still going to be a lot of time savings because it has two things going for it. First of all, it's going to have what they call level boarding, which is the platform will be raised and then you can get on the same level. You'll pay in advance, so that kind of makes it quicker. The other thing is that they'll have traffic signal priority over there, so buses will have the opportunity to get a little extra green light time so that they can move through those traffic lights a little quicker. So with those two things, and then the buses being spaced 4.3 minutes apart during the busiest times, we don't expect the buses to be bunching up because they're not going to be at the stops as long as they curve. Okay.
Well, hopefully that gives you an initial sense, and I think, like I said, we'll be in a position to have a more robust conversation about what specifically is happening in Aurora. So if you are not there, we are happy to invite that question as part of that conversation and answer that. So thank you. Yes, gentleman in the black shirt. Yes, thank you.
I'm Terry Chavez. Jacob Belair. I tried to read your transportation report. I'm college educated. I couldn't understand it. It was so dense and using language. I couldn't follow it. Okay? That's number one. So my question is, if you're saying you're going to add 2 to 5 cars per minute, I mean, that when the cars get diverted, you choose not to, Colfax. I understand that on 13, 14, or 17. Well, do I just assume that when people want to get off Colfax and they come down Bel Air, there'll be 2 to 5 more cars per minute down my street with families and children, that type of thing?
So I think the question really is, what can we expect in terms of volumes on the
Residential
streets? And I'd love for you, Charlie, if you haven't already, just to talk a little bit about the study that the city will be conducting too around safety as it relates to them.
First, just acknowledging the density of the transportation report. I definitely appreciate that comment. There's those of us in the industry, I think, are challenged of how do we provide the technical information that sort of the technical decision makers need, while also trying to make that accessible. The report itself, obviously 180 pages by the time all said and done, that is why we published the sort of executive summary that I think was put on the webpage, that we tried to dial down the language a lot, but I'm also going to be here after the meeting if you want to ask specific questions about either of those. And I can try to do that in much more simple language. In regards to the north-south residential streets, that 2 to 5 vehicle per minute number really is for the east-west streets. We expect that number to be much less than that on the north-south streets. It sort of depends on the proximity of residential streets to the nearest signals that are going to have a left turn access off of Colfax. But generally speaking, you know, we're some streets, you know, a dozen or a couple dozen vehicles per hour is what we're expecting. Again, some more than others, depending on sort of the spacing of signals. As Abby mentioned, you know, we're acknowledging that shift to 13, 14, 17, you know, is something that we need to be managing, acknowledging that with the change in access off of Colfax with the center running lanes, that there's going to be a set of sort of neighborhood traffic issues that we're going to need to be managing now and through the project's construction and early operation. So the city and this project team has kicked off a component of the design that is studying sort of those neighborhood traffic concerns like the ones that you raised, to understand the magnitude of those from street to street and to identify ways of mitigating those, hopefully proactively with before the project is constructed, while also recognizing that after the project is operational, that we're going to need to be out there and monitoring situations and solving problems as they come up. So we are looking for feedback. Again, I said I'll be here after the Q&A is wrapped up. We are looking for specific feedback about specific streets and would love to know more about issues we need to be looking at in this part of the design related to the neighborhood traffic concerns.
I would also like to say that part of the city's plan is something called Vision Zero. And that's the idea that nobody is killed on a roadway in the city of Denver. And so just because we're working on Colfax because it's in the high entry network, it doesn't mean that we're not also concerned about other streets as well. And so our vision is for safety to increase throughout the network. And we'll be looking at that as we move forward with the Colfax BRT project.
John, thank you. And I'm gonna hand it over to you. I do want to acknowledge that different people consume different information differently, and we recognize that. And for sure, some people like to go through the details of the transportation report, and some people don't. And so I do want to just let you know, or those folks in the room, if you haven't seen this already, we've developed sort of shorter video Colfax FAQs on the street. So it's about kind of 4 to 5 minute videos. One speaks specifically around the fundamentals of BRT, and one speaks specifically to the findings of the transportation report. So perhaps that could be, you know, something that you would like to check out. So I'm going to hand it over. Did you have a question, sir, in the back chair? Great. And then I'm going to ask Emma after we have this question to see if we have any questions online, and then we can come back to them. Yes, sir.
So stand here. I would agree with woman right here since I live with her. But we are concerned about what's going to happen with traffic. Because to get to 17th or get to 13th or 14th, you have to go in a perpendicular way, make a right or a left turn to get there, and you're going to go through the neighborhood. This gets to a little bit of what I heard Kurt say. You're involved in community development. Try to make a nice neighborhood. Either family can go, or have good parks, good schools, and just want you to do anything you can do to make sure that you protect neighborhoods. It's important. We have people that come back and they want to come to Denver. We want to make Denver be better than all the suburbs, basically. And so I wanted to say that. So if you could give us more information, because this is the first time I saw it in the detail report too. Glad you put it in the summary about, because that's really a lot of cars that could be coming to different people's neighborhood. Maybe Bel Air Street could be Birch. I think could be a second final big question. This one, and it maybe may not be able to answer this. is the federal congressional the budget debate going on? Have you heard anything about us being at risk for this project?
So let me set it up and then John, I'm gonna turn it over to you. So one, I think it'd be helpful, because we didn't talk about it a lot in terms of how this project is gonna be funded. So maybe starting with that, and then talking a little bit about, is there potential risk to that? And then Kurt, I'm just gonna flag for you if there's anything that you wanted to say relative to this point about safe, comfortable neighborhoods. I'd love for you to just engage.
Sure, so, yeah, how is this project being funded? It's a pretty complicated picture, and I'm gonna try and simplify it. Basically, we're looking at the project costing somewhere around $250 million. Now, about half of that, we are asking the Federal Transit Administration to support. The other half is coming from state and local sources. The city is providing somewhere around 75 million, and then providing some, and then Dr. Cog, our regional transportation planning. And a couple other sources. So about half is coming from local, and about half we're making this request to the Federal Transit Administration. That's the small start grant that I was talking about at the beginning. And so is that at risk with the budget passing? So I would say that potentially it could be a risk, but I see that risk is very, very small. And there's a lot of reasons for that. But the main thing is that for Congress to really care about this, it's such a small drop in the things that they really do care about. It's just, they'd have to be like, you know what, I just don't like Colfax. And then they'll cut the budget funding, because it's already put into the president's budget, and it's not currently being debated, those line items for the Small Starts program. It's already set aside, and no conversation about those funds have been debated. So we don't see any risk with that happening right now. Excuse me. Sure.
Yeah, I really appreciate the comment around pedestrian safety, especially the neighborhoods. I live in Park Hill, my son crosses 17th to go to school. I also think we need to acknowledge Colfax as being part of the neighborhood. I think a lot of us view it as maybe the edge or something that we don't go to. And the vision long term is to have Colfax be more part of our neighborhood. Colfax is, if not the most, it's one of the most dangerous places for pedestrians in the city. We have one of the highest rates of people killed and seriously injured on Colfax relative to every other corridor. And a lot of us walk on Colfax, and there's new restaurants coming up there all the time. My son walked to Nugs, the ice cream shop, as do a lot of his friends. People cross Colfax all the time to get to potty class or all these things, rec centers. So it's not either or. I think we need to do both. And in the East Area Plan, it was acknowledged that a top priority for pedestrian safety is to manage any type of diversion that happens. Now we know the details of that diversion based on the transportation report, and we have a variety of policies and specific infrastructure packages in the East Area Plan, which again will guide our capital improvement decisions on how to slow down traffic in the neighborhoods with traffic calming, with crossing safety, and those kinds of measures. And I think we're all happy to take additional feedback in addition to the recommendations that are in the plans.
Thank you. Yes, I'm gonna go to Emma, see what questions we have online, and then we'll come back to the room for a couple of remaining questions.
Thanks, Abby. We have one question from Robert online who asks, what actions will be taken as far as bus lane enforcement? Bus lanes downtown and on Broadway are constantly being used by car drivers. How will this be addressed on BRT routes?
So who would like to take bus lane enforcement? Doug, John?
I can do my best, yeah.
Yes.
This isn't a topic that's come up, but obviously for the buses to get the most benefit, there needs to be a reasonable adherence to the bus lanes in place. So I think I'll go and say that 100% conformance with the bus lane is probably not realistic, but at the same time, the majority conformance to that is still going to provide a lot of benefit. for people traveling by bus. So perfect is maybe the enemy of good to some extent. I think just in general, Denver is challenged right now with enforcement of traffic and policing. I don't think we have anyone here from a police department today, but over the past few years, a lot of PD resources have been prioritized for crime response, basically, and sort of de-emphasized on traffic enforcement. We do hope that shifts in the future so that, you know, the number of officers dedicated to traffic enforcement in the future years looks more like it was back during the pandemic. But we're also monitoring legislation that just passed at the state level that is enabling the use of camera enforcement for more things and in more locations. So a lot of those more typical uses are things like red light cameras and speed enforcement. I think this bill is waiting on the governor's desk for signature unless anyone has a better update than I have on that. But we are exploring whether or not there's the possibility of doing that, not just on Colfax, but really across the system for enforcement of bus lane infractions.
Great, all right, thanks, Charlie, and I did want to take this.
Oh, and I was going to add, because these are center running lanes, we're not expecting to see as many violations of them because you don't have passenger, you don't have cars making turns and things from them like you do from the lanes on Broadway 17. So while I think enforcement is something to be cognizant of as this gets implemented, hopefully it's not as big of an issue.
I was just gonna say, I think it's worth noting that the team is now engaging in a series of peer exchange conversations. So recognizing that Denver is not the first city to implement BRT. So what can we learn from other cities that have implemented like systems, similar use cases? So expect to hear more from that, but I did want to mention it because I think it's an important aspect of the project. I saw one hand back here and then I think I saw a hand here. Yes.
And just build on what the roommates over there were asking about. I live on Albion, so I'm right before, just 1 block east of Colfax, and I'm just a little bit north, or 1 block east of Colorado, just a little bit north of Colfax. So I know that when the water department had 17 closed, and on weekends when they diverted traffic off of Colorado Boulevard, Albion Street became a bumper to bumper thoroughfare. And I am very concerned about what traffic's gonna look like once it's down to 1 lane of traffic approaching Colorado, people wanting to make a right turn, and you know, they're going to take Albion Street instead of Colorado if it's backed up. And I see that intersection getting backed up a lot now, even with 2 lanes in each direction. So I'm concerned about that. And after I came to the last meeting, I noticed that as I'm coming home and if I'm coming east, I usually go past Colorado because that left turn lane is very backed up. And I'll either make a left turn towards Albion. You can't make a direct left because there's a median there, but you can go half a block, maybe median, then make a right from the bus lane, or you can go up to Bel Air. And I'm wondering, am I gonna have to go all the way up to Cherry to make a left turn? That's gonna create more traffic through the neighborhoods, not just for me, but anybody else that has to do something similar. So that's going to create more traffic that children are going to have to be aware of. It's gonna create more emissions because we're traveling further. So just one going to point that out. I know I appreciate that I will be able to cross Colfax easier because I tell neighbors, you know, oh, I want to go, you know, south like to Trader Joe's or that area of town, that I feel like I have to cross the Mississippi River to get there, and they all agree. So that I appreciate, but then coming home, if I'm going to have to zigzag through the neighborhood, I really don't want to be doing that.
First of all, let me just appreciate the point about the construction with Denver Water. And I think, as John mentioned, the general contract construction will be coming on board, and we'll be sure to share some of that feedback with the general contractor once they are on board, which they are not yet, but really useful point. So thank you for that. And I think it just like generally, like what's happening with left turn lanes, and what's that going to mean for people's access to their neighborhoods or to their two places where they're.
I still live on Albion Street, so just a little bit south of you. So anyway, but back to your question. So the macro level issue that the lane repurposing on pullbacks and sort of what that means from a traffic shift or diversion standpoint. And then as Abby mentioned, the center lane is going to have a median associated with it that runs much of the corridor with access for turns off of Colfax at its specific location. So just to talk a little bit about that median and the why and some of the other benefits, then come back to the traffic questions. Yeah, I might have to come back to you after the Q&A to confirm exactly how it's going to work. But one thing I want to mention about the median that is in addition to the travel time savings for buses is just the safety improvements, both for people walking as well as what we would call angle crashes on Colfax. A lot of crashes on Colfax now are related to people trying to turn off of minor streets onto Colfax or trying to turn Colfax onto minor streets. So by relocating those left turns to signalized locations, we do expect to see a safety benefit for people turning there. With the Denver Water Project on 17th, that took away 4 lanes of east-west travel through the area. So think about, just to put that in comparison, what we're talking about here with the repurposing on Colfax is 2 lanes. We don't expect the magnitude of what happens to be as significant as what we saw with the Denver Water Project. These are the various sorts of issues that I mentioned in the question about, I think, Bel Air Street, related to concerns about how traffic is going to shift onto some of the north-south residential streets. We're looking to understand those better now and get ahead of those a little bit. So I don't have a specific answer. What is the project planning to do at this moment, other than to say we're looking at that and we really want to get a good understanding of those concerns. So I'd love to talk to you a little bit more about that afterwards so that we can come back to these meetings in the future with more specifics on that.
Great. We're going to take one more question in the room. Let me just, I know Kurt has a baseball game that he has to go to. His son is here. And so I just wanted to give Kurt you the opportunity. Thank you for joining me and give you the opportunity to take off because we all have multiple responsibilities. So appreciate it.
If there's any follow-up questions, thank you. I mean, happy to circulate my email and follow up. Appreciate it.
Kurt, thank you very much. Thanks to your son for being so patient. Yes, you had a question, or was there somebody that I'm missing? Okay, I just can't see, so that's fine. Yep, whoever needs to. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Dennis Royer. I'm a former city traffic engineer for the city and county of Denver. I've probably performed and reviewed hundreds of reports, so I have some comments about this one. It's obvious this study is designed for obfuscation, and if you're not familiar with that word, this lady hit it perfectly here. It's confusion, okay? It is not clear at all. They use the RTD data for 2015, they use traffic studies from 2019. For accuracy, everything should be post-pandemic, 2022, okay? Key elements are missing. There should be a drawing or a chart that shows ADT, AM and PM volumes by segment for 13th, 14th, Colfax, 17th, and 18th. There should be another drawing or chart showing diversion by segment of 13th, 14th, 17th, and 18th. And a further street diversion should you go beyond those corridors, and that should all be designed for 2027, which is the opening day of this facility. The percent diversion from Colfax should be clearly stated in this report, which it is not. I have to assume the analysis of 2019 volumes is intended as 2027, since you list build and no build. However, it's not clear, and I didn't see anything in the basic report identifying any sort of growth factor, since you got to get from 2019 to 2027, which is when the build goes into effect. Nobody cares about 2040, okay? That's a planning thing, okay? Most of us won't even be here in 2040. We care about 2027 and what's going to happen when you open this sucker up. For my questions, I've only asked this question, I don't know for how many years. Which signals are going to be preempted? have you factored in the recent Vision Zero announcement that they intend to take 2 lanes, one lane each off of 17th and 18th for bike lanes, and considering the businesses that are on those, it's gonna be like Colfax, they can't take the parking lane, so they're taking a moving lane. So when you've done your analysis, did you factor in, you don't have 3 lanes on those streets, you're gonna have 2. And the last question I have is, how do you submit an environmental analysis to the EPA in July that has not been reviewed by the public? And when do we get to see it?
Dennis, thank you for the question. There's a lot there. There are a lot of questions. My guess is that many of those are better addressed after the fact, with Charlie in particular, to the extent that he can walk through the details. That said, let's talk about what I heard as the question that you keep asking that you haven't gotten a response to. So we'll start there. And then Charlie and team, I would invite you to answer any other aspects of the question that Dennis shared. So the question around how we factored in the bike lanes, I believe you said, on some of the parallel streets as part of the modeling. How do we want to, how have we considered that piece?
I think I can all questions just in one. So first off, the transportation report was prepared in accordance with CDOT's guidelines for traffic analysis forecasting, which reflects sort of the state of the practice for how these sorts of analyses are done around the country, frankly. And CDOT was involved the entire time. It is a state road, so they have an interest in making sure that the analysis meets their requirements. And it was prepared per the requirements of what we need for our National Environmental Policy Act documentation. So some of the analysis assumptions and analysis years and methods and so on relate to decisions made to make sure that we're satisfying CDOT, satisfying the requirements of the National Environmental Policy Act. One of those requirements is that we can only assume projects in our future scenarios that are funded. And that's established by Dr. Hogg and the Regional Transportation Plan. So at this time, 17th and 18th are proposed projects. Denver Moves Bikes has an entire network of bikeways proposed around the city. The vast majority of those projects are not funded today. So that is not an assumption that we assumed as a part of our transportation report. And it would have been incompatible with the National Environmental Policy Act to do so. What that means is that if those projects move forward, that there will be a separate public process and a separate analysis process to analyze the impacts of that and understand the community sentiment and feelings in shaping those projects. But that's not a decision that we're making as a part of this project or here tonight. RTD, I think this question came up last time, and the city have transit signal priority at 19 intersections. I Colfax 18. I did that last time. Yeah, that are already operational. Those will be the same traffic signals that have transit signal priority once the project is in place. To simplify what that means down a bit for the room here, the buses on Colfax today are communicating with the traffic lights. As the buses approach the traffic lights, what the buses want to avoid is the scenario that the bus shows up just as the light turns red, because that's the moment that the bus experiences the most delay, around a minute before they can proceed again. So as the buses are approaching a traffic light with transit signal priority, the buses are telling the signal, hey, just wait 3 more seconds so I can get through, and then turn red. That's what happens on Colfax today, and saves a lot of time for the buses now, and then we'll contribute to the travel time savings for buses in the future. It is different from preemption, which is what emergency vehicles have. Emergency vehicles are communicating with the signals, but they're saying, I need you to change the signal now so that I can get through safely for reasons of life and human safety. But it's fundamentally different from the way that transit signal priority works. There's also some rules. It's a fairly intelligent system that if the intersecting streets can't give away any green time because there's so much queues backed up, it won't necessarily hold that green time anymore. So it's a little bit complex, but the same 18 that have it today are the same 18 that have it.
Thanks for tackling quite a few of those questions, and I really would invite you to stay and ask some of those additional questions, which I know are top of mind for you. So thank you for those. I do want to just acknowledge that it's almost 7 o'clock. I do want to respect everybody's time. And so what I'd like to do is just talk with you just briefly about what the next steps are in the project. And I'm sure these fellows would appreciate being able to stand up after sitting in these chairs for so long. So let me just talk quickly about these next steps. So many of you have seen this. Here's where we're going in the project itself. This is not all inclusive, but I think hits some of the big topics. So many of you have weighed in on the links logo. So the BRT system will be called links. We're going to be looking for feedback on what that's ultimately going to look like. So color palette, further refining the station and streetscape designs. As we mentioned before, building out the public art that we're going to see along the corridor as part of the project. Really aligning with Denver Water as they begin construction on their water main replacement this year, leading up to Colfax BRT construction. As Nick talked about, he is kicking off the curbside access plan. Would welcome your feedback on that. Where do you see parking generators? Where are some of the challenges? What would you like to see as success? So he'll be sticking around. Would love your feedback. And then as Charlie mentioned, really taking the lead on the safety analysis, particularly around the parallel streets. What does that look like as part of the project? And then finally, we do have small businesses here as in the plans. Those plans are being developed in partnership with opportunity. And then, as I mentioned, peer exchanges. Environmental analysis was also mentioned. That also needs to be reviewed by FTA. Once we have those findings, we are absolutely planning to share some of those findings with the community. So that should also be on the list. I just want to point out that there are multiple ways for you all to stay engaged. Thank you for showing up to this public meeting. You can find information mostly on our project website, which is that top link. We also have a virtual engagement hub, which has recordings of these meetings and other materials that you can look through. We do have a public inquiry form. You can submit questions or comments to us, which we respond to, and then community updates. So if you're not on the list, you plan to put your email if you provided it on that list so that you'll receive those community updates. And then, as I mentioned, we'll be having another workshop shortly in July in Aurora to talk about what this could look like. Just stay tuned. We'd likely be out in the community, if not through community events, then back in this public forum in the fall time frame. So thank you all for coming out. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. Thank you for your engagement. We'll stick around to do any other questions. Thanks to those online who have joined us virtually. Appreciate it. Bye all.